Hello, this is Amin and you are watching session 50 of ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. In this session, we are going to implement CRUD operation in our web application, which is ASP.NET Core MVC Web Application with Entity Framework Core. First, we are implement create operation in our web application, which needs two action method in the controller. And we call the action method as create action method. And it should have two different parts, HttpGet and HttpPost. Let me flip to Visual Studio to implement first the I category repository and category repository in the web application. First, I need to add one interface for category model. We need to select interface and set a name for our interface. As this repository is related to category, that's why I call it iCategory repository. And here I should declare a method for getting all the categories inside the category entity. I should add the namespace, which is inside system collections generic, and I need a IE enumerable of category, and its name is get all categories. I will be doing this part a little bit faster because I have already discussed about dependency injection in session 16. Now I created a interface, and next I need to create a repository which should be implemented from this interface that I have created. I create a class and I call it SQL Server category repository. SQL Server category repository would be implemented from iCategory repository, and I implement the method that I declare inside the interface. Also, I need a constructor, and I need to inject the web app DB context. Also, I need to create a field, private field for this purpose. And here I return all the record inside the categories entity in the database. Also, I need to add this service inside the startup class. And here I copy and paste this line. And I use I category repository, and I will connect it to SQL Server category repository. Next, I need to create action method with HttpGet method. Also here I need to add I category repository to be used inside the create action method. Also I create a field, a read-only field for this purpose. And here I decorate this action method with HttpGet and create a public action method, which its result is I action result, and its name is create. This action method returns a view. But before returning a view, I need to get all the categories to be displayed inside the create cast form. I use category repository and get all categories method. Then I need to store all the categories inside list of select list item. For this purpose, first I need to create a list of select list item, and I call it cat list. Then with for each loop, I add all the categories as a select list item. I use cat list and add method, and inside that one I should add a new selected list item which has several overloaded version. I use this overload version which needs text and value, and in this practice I should set text and value with the category, and I set category name as a text and also category ID as a value. It should be a string value, that's why I convert it to a string. Now I have my category as a selected list item, and then I store it in the view bag. Next, I need to create a view model for a create view. Before creating the view, I'm going to view model and create a class. I call this class create cast view model. I've already discussed about view model and the way that we can use the view model in our web application. That's why I just copy and paste the required code, which is related to the properties that I need inside this view model. Also, I add some data annotation. I need to add the namespace to use data annotation. And also I need system namespace, and here I need to add the model because payment methods enum is inside the models. Now I can use this view model, which is create cast view model, as a model of create view, which I will use for create new record of cost. That's why I can back to cost controller to create a view. Inside the cost controller, I right click on the view and add a view. It is a razor view empty and its name is create. And then here I'm using the knowledge of session 44 and 29. I just copy and paste the required code here in the interest of time. And I explain a little bit about the code. This is the code that I need inside the create view. And as you can see, create cast view model needs its namespace, because if you remember, I disable path of view model inside view imports, and I'm going to view imports and I activate this line again and save it. And you can see inside the create, I don't need to mention the namespace anymore. And as you can see, I have a form and it's connected to cast create action method with ASP controller and ASP action. Its method is post, and I'm using bootstrap classes. And also for each property, I'm using label and input with ASP4. And also for validation, I'm using ASP validation 4, which I describe in session 44 and 29 in detail. And here for category, you can see I'm using ASP items, and I use the items which is inside the view bag, which its name is categories. Let me check the name and make sure the name inside the cost controller is categories as well. You can see here the name of this view bag should be equal the name of view bag here, and I copy and paste it for making sure the name it doesn't have any typo. And also for payment method, I'm using enum get enum select list, and I'm using payment method select list. And I describe about these topics in previous sessions that are, as I mentioned, in session 44 and 29. And let me run the project to see what I have until now. Project is up and running, and I'm going to cast create, which I expect to have my form. You can see I have my form here, and all the properties. And also inside the category, I have the categories which I imported with seeding data, and also I have my payment method. But you can see if I press create button, I will receive an error page because the form will post to cost controller again, and I don't have HTTP post create action method yet. Let me prove it by pressing create button, and as you can see, as long as I press create button, I receive HTTP error 405, which is related to unavailability of HTTP post method of create inside the cost controller. Let me stop debugging and back to cost controller and create HTTP post part of the create action method. I copy and paste this part, and as I pass an object of create cost view model, I should have an object of create cost view model here. I need to add its namespace by pressing Ctrl Period button and adding the namespace, and its object, I call it model. Then I need to check whether the received model is valid or not. For this purpose, I can use a condition and check whether model state is valid or not. And as you can see, I check it with if condition, and model state is valid or not. If it's valid, I can submit the data. But before submitting the data, if we check SQL Server cost repository, we can see create method of this repository accepts an object of cost, but here I have an object of create cost view model. That's why I should create an object of cost. Then I set the value of the created cost object with the create cost view model. I don't need to add its ID, but I need to add its amount, and its amount should be equal model.amount. Also, I have comment, and it should be equal model.comment. You can see I have IntelliSense, and I can add it with pressing tab twice. And also I have registered data, and I equal it with model registered data, and category ID should be equal model that category ID. And also I have payment method, which should be equal model.payment method. Also, if you remember, I added a property for image of the invoice, but in this session I omit uploading the image. But in the upcoming session I will talk about how you can upload a photo and how you can use photo inside the your ASP.NET Core MVC web application. Now I created an object of cost, and the value is equal the value that I filled inside the form. Now I can use cost repository and create method which receive an object of cost to be stored inside the database. And after successfully submitting the data, I need to return to a view, and now I want to return to index action method, which it doesn't exist for time being. And of course, after the registration, I will receive an error. But in the continuation of this session, I will create index action method, which will contain the list of the registered cost. If you remember, in the EF core relationship, I create one-to-one relationship between cost and category, but I want to correct that one because each cost can have just one category, but each category can be assigned to different costs. That's why it should be one-to-many relationship. That's why I'm going to category, and here I change it to list of costs, and I change it to cost. That's why I need to add a migration, and I use add migration inside package manager console, and I call it relationship correction. You can see inside the migration file, I changed the relationship between category and cost, and I need to update database to be implemented inside the database. The changes are implemented inside the database. Now I can check whether the create module is working fine or not. I build and run the project to see the result. And here I'm going to cast create, and I add amount and date and comment and category and payment of method, and press create button. As expected, I received 404 because cost index action method and view is no longer exist, but I can return to Visual Studio to check whether the record is registered or not. I'm going to SQL Server Object Explorer, and I'm going to the server that I use for this purpose. Inside the cost DB, I have tables, and inside the tables I have DBO cost, and I check the data inside that one. As expected, the record is created, and you can see the amount that I have entered inside the form reflected inside the database. Let's close this section and back to cost controller and create index action method, which will show the list of registered cost. Add another HttpGet method. It would be public, and its result is I action result, and its name is index. And just I need to catch all the records of cost entity and send it back to the view. I need a view for this purpose. And before that one, I need to catch all the recorded cost. I can use a cost repository, and I can store it inside cost object. And I use cost repository and get all costs. And then I pass this cost to the view. Then I can add a view for index, which will be show list of registered cost. It would be razor view empty, and its name would be index, and I add it, and I copy and paste the related code, which I explained about the cost list in session 22 and 27. If you are not familiar with the code inside the view, you can review session 22 and 27 for list, cost list, and list of the records, and also for create view, you can review session 44 and 29. As you can see, I have I enumerable of cost as a model, and here I add the view title, and here I add a button, which is an anchor element, which lead me to create cost view and create cost action method for adding new cost. And also here you can see I have a table which display ID, amount, category, comment, and payment method. And here you can see I have a part for actions, and the actions is not linked yet, and I have href with hash sign, and here you can see I use for each loop, and I receive all the costs inside the model, and I will display it here. Let me save it. And before launching the project, I want to edit the menu to lead me to display the list of costs. I'm going to shared, and inside main layout, you can see here, I have the menu that I created in the previous session. I don't need this drop down menu anymore now for time being. And here for the cost, I have a menu, but I want to change it because it is lead me to cost controller, but list action method is no longer exist, and I change it to index. I save the changes and run the project again to see the result. Project is up and running, and by clicking cost list, you can see I have a list of costs, and this is the cost that I created. And if I create another record, which its amount would be 250, and the date would be April 2nd, 2022, and I add a comment for that one. It should be a bill, and I paid with credit, and I press the create button. You can see it automatically lead me to the list, and here I have the list of the registered cost. But for time being, if I click on view, edit, and delete, they are not working because they are not calling any action method for time being. Let me start with view. For this purpose, I stop the project, and I'm going to the link that I have inside the index, and here I have view. But just bear in mind, if you use tag helper, you cannot use href simultaneously. If you want to use anchor element with href, you cannot use ASP-controller and ASP-action. And if you want to use a tag helper, that's why you should remove href and use the tag helper that I explained earlier. And I use ASP controller. The controller would be cost, and ASP action, the action would be detail. I don't have this action method for time being, but I will add it to display the detail of each record. Let me add a HttpGet action method for this purpose and create the respective view for the detail. I closed all the open tabs, and I'm going to cost controller. And here I add another HttpGet action method, which would be a public, and its result is iAction result, and its name is detail. It would receive an ID which is related to ID of cost that I click on the view. That's why I receive an ID which is int, and of course it return a view. Also, I should add ASP route to the link of the view. You can see I have ASP controller and ASP action, but I didn't pass any ID to the detail view. That's why I should use ASP route. and its root would be ID, which should be equal the ID of the cast. Let me copy it from here and paste it here. Now by clicking on the view, I would be redirected to cast detail, and I pass the ID of the cast to be displayed inside the detail view. And here I create an object of cast, and I use cast repository again. And inside cast repository, I have get cast by ID and receive an ID, and it return the cast which its ID is equal the input parameter ID. And now I should display the cast here. Also, I need to add a view for this action method, which should be razor view empty, and its name would be detail. I copy and paste the code, which I explained the code of detail view in session 20, 21, and 27. The code is not complicated code, and I receive a model which is cast that I passed inside the detail action method, and then I will display the detail of cast inside a card, and also I have a button inside the card which return the web application to list of the cast. Let me save the changes and run the project again to see the result. As you can see, project is up and running, and I'm going to cast list again, and I create on view on the second row of the records, and you can see I have the detail of that cast inside the card, which is detail cast ID 17, and its amount and category and rest of the data. I mentioned comments in the label twice. I will correct it later. And here you can see I have category ID, and in the upcoming session I will show you how you can display the name of category, because I should join cast and category table with each other and display a result. But for this session I just display the category ID, and by clicking on this one I will return again to the list, and by click on the view you can see I have the detail of another cost record. Let me back to project, and here I should change this one to payment method. Until now I have create and read module of CRUD operation. In the continuation of this session I will talk about update and delete. For update purpose, I add a data annotation to cast model, and here because I want to use cast model inside the update view, and I use data type, and its data type is date because I don't want to display the time part of the registered date. I'm saving the changes, and I back to cast controller, and here I add HttpGet action method for update purpose of cast, and here I create another action method which its result would be iAction result, and its name is update. Then I need an input element which is ID of the cast. Then I will search for that ID, and if I find that ID I will display the data of that ID in the form. Then I can modify the data, and of course it's return a view. Also, I'm going to the index view, and for edit purpose, I'm adding the ASP controller and ASP action and ASP route ID to route me to update action method. It is inside cast and it's update, and also I need the ID of the cast to catch the data and call the data inside the form. And here I need to receive the data from the database. That's why I'm using cast repository. And again, I'm using get cast by ID and ID. And also I need to display the categories. For this purpose, I'm using this piece of code, which I use inside the create to display the list of categories. And then here I return the cost. And now I add another view for this purpose. It is a razor view empty, and its name is update. In the interest of time, I'm using the code that I use inside the create view, and I copy it from there and paste it here. And here I use cast instead of create cast view model. And also I need to add one hidden input to store ID of the cost to be used when I submit the data. That's why I add an input tag, which should be hidden. And with ASP4, I connect it to ID. Also here, I change the create button to update button. Also, I add another button which will return the web application to list of the registered cost. For displaying both buttons in the same line, I'm using Bootstrap classes, and I create one anchor link with btn and btn info class of Bootstrap with cost list, and also the submit button to submit this form for edit purpose. Let me run the project until this step to see whether update is working or not. Project is up and running, and I'm going to cost list. And this time I click edit button, and you can see I'm leading to a form which contains the data, and here I can change the data to the value that I want. And of course, if I click on the edit button, I will receive an error because I don't have HttpPost update action method yet. But if I create cast list, I will return to cast list again. Let me back to Visual Studio and implement HttpPost part of update action method. I'm going to cast controller, and here I add HttpPost section of update action method. It will receive an object of cost. That's why I'm using cost, and the object name is model. And I should check whether the model is valid or not. That's why I'm using model state. If model state is valid, I can update the data. Otherwise, I should return the view with the validation error. And for this purpose, I can copy and paste this part again to display the validation error. And here I use model.id instead of ID. And I use cast repository, and it has update section, and I just need to send the updated data. Then after successfully updating the data, I need to return a view, and I want to return my web application to list of the cost. For this purpose, I can use a redirect to action, and I mentioned the action index, which contains the list of records of cost. Also, before running the project, I need to do a change inside updates view. And as I copy the code from the create view, I haven't changed the form ASP-action, and it is a still create. I should update it to update. And now I can run the project and see the result. And this time I'm going to cost list, and I modified the record, which its amount is 100, category is 2, and comment is mentioned no comment, and the payment method is debit. I'm going to edit, and I change the amount to 300 and change the date to 28th of April, and I change the no comment to no comment to, and change the category to rent, and the payment method to cash, and I edit it. And as you can see, the record was updated successfully, and I could manage to update the record successfully. And the last part, I'm going to implement a delete operation. We implement create, read, and update from CRUD operation. And the last one is delete. Let me back to Visual Studio. First, I want to implement delete function with HttpGet, which is not a secure way, and I will explain why deleting a record with HttpGet is not a secure way. Then I will show you how we can delete a record with a more secure way. And the action method is a public action results, and its name is delete, and it receive an ID, which is the ID of the record. And here I use cast repository, and then delete method that I created in the repository, which needs ID, and it is the ID of record that I want to be deleted. And then I return to index action method by redirect to action. And I redirect to action index. Let me save the changes, and I'm going to index, and here I'm using again the ASP controller, ASP action, and ASP route ID instead of href. And this one, it's lead me to delete action method. Let me save the changes and run the project. Project is up and running, and I'm going to cost list. And by pressing delete button, you can see the record is deleted, and it's working perfectly. But if someone try to delete the records maliciously, they can perform it through the URL, and they can use the URL and use the delete here, and just need to add the ID of the record that he or she wants to be deleted, and you can see it's delete without any permission, and they can delete all the records, which it's not a secure way for stopping this behavior. We should process delete operation with HttpPost. For this purpose, I flip to Visual Studio, and first of all, I should wrap this action button to a form, Then I should change this line of code to a button tag, and I change anchor element to button tag because I should submit this form, and that's why I need to change it to button, and its type should be submit. And inside the form, I'm using ASP controller. It should be cast and ASP action, which would be delete. And also I should pass the ID. That's why I'm using ASP route ID. And its ID would be cast ID. Which I use here. Let me reformat the code and delete this one. With these changes, I can submit the delete with HttpPost, and also the form method should be post. I save the changes, and I'm going to cast controller and change this one to HttpPost. Let me save the changes and run the project again to see whether I'm able to delete the record with URL or not. The project is up and running. I'm going to cast list. And here you can see I have ID 16 and 18. And this time I'm using delete and ID 18. And you can see I received 405 error, which is related to the method, and the get method is not available anymore. That's why I can't delete the record with URL, and this is the secure way that I can operate the delete operation. And here you can see by pressing this button, I can remove the record. And now we implement all the CRUD operation inside our ASP.NET Core MVC Web Application with Entity Framework Core and with the repository that I have implemented in the previous session. And here you can see the code which is related to CRUD operation, which is related to create, read, update, and delete. And you can see I have the code which is related to CRUD operation inside the slide. Thank you for watching this session. And don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel and share your idea with us to improve this tutorial. Once more, thank you for being with us.